Welcome back to H Hour. If you are, is this your first episode of Tina that you are listening to on H Hour? Be aware that there's a previous episode right before this one in your podcast app or on YouTube, wherever you're looking, and that is the Icebreaker episode with Tina. I strongly suggest you go back to that episode, watch or listen to that through. It's about 15, 20 minutes long, and then roll straight into this one. You can, of course, completely ignore me and continue listening here. You will be satisfied either way, whichever order you do them in. If you want to watch these on live stream in future or submit questions to the guest in advance, then you should become a subscriber. Go to patreon.com/HK podcasts or hughkier.substack.com. Those links are on the blurb as well. Enough of that nonsense. On to the real stuff. Tina Woods, welcome to H Hour.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm very glad to have you. Very, very glad to have you here. Mainly because we're going to be talking about a bunch of topics of which I am interested in. I have very little experience in. I know that you studied genetics at uni, among a bunch of other things. And since then, I'm sure your knowledge and experience has grown exponentially in the field of science and human science, biology, etc. Just for a bit of info, the only real research I've done on genetics has been reading one book.
Yeah.
Robert Plomin. Blueprint. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't read it.
Blew my mind. Absolutely blew my mind. And it got me interested in the subject. I have not had an opportunity to explore it further until this moment.
Right.
Introduced to you via Longevity Rave and Yukari Takahisa. So excellent. Could you please give me your credentials in this area of expertise of yours so people can think, she actually knows what she's talking about?
Well, so it starts way back when I studied, as you said, genetics. So I was pre-med, studied genetics as my specialty, had always been very interested in life, how life is created. And of course, and actually I thought for a long time I was going to become an obstetrician. But I decided an obstetrician, which is the doctor that delivers babies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, or gynecologist, obstetrician, obs-gyne. So that was my sort of life goal for many, many years while I was growing up. Then went to university. I was pre-med. And I then, when I graduated, I decided that maybe medicine wasn't really for me because it was the whole route to becoming a doctor was so sort of laid out and programmed and structured. And I just felt there's a calling of me to do something a bit different at that time in my life, so 1920. So in the end, I kind of hummed and hawed, and I actually did some research. Again, this was in the US. I'm Canadian, actually, but went to school in the States and did a year of research in cancer. And while I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I actually then traveled to London with a bit of money I'd saved, through that year of working. I actually was bartending at night, so I'd made a pile of money as a bartender. So I was able to save up enough money to head over to Europe. My parents are European. I knew I could work there. So then I got my first job in medical films, so training doctors on technologies, new drugs, all that sort of stuff. And in the main, a lot of the programs were funded by the drug companies. Educational material, training material, that sort of thing.
So you putting the material together?
In those early days, I was a medical film scriptwriter because this is even in the days before we had computers doing animation. I was literally working with artists in the studio doing hand-drawn cell animation, like the old days of film. I mean, this shows you my age, right? So, so I would hang out with all these sort of, illustrators and cartoon, these sort of artists developing very, very technical films, which were animated. So it was a great job, and I had to hang out and speak with, very, very expert doctors around the world and scientists and what have you. And in fact, I remember my first foray into understanding aging and longevity was I did a film on the aging process, and actually I approached Leonard Hayflick, who basically is the mastermind behind, understanding the mechanisms behind cell death. That cells, they multiply a certain amount of times before they die. Apoptosis is actually the scientific word for that. So he is still considered one of the leading sort of thinkers in this whole space about understanding the whole process of cell death and dying and how we age. And so I worked with him, and this would have been, oh my goodness, this would have been about 40 years ago. So I kind of was involved in that whole field of education and training and communications for about almost 35 years, actually, working within the pharma and biotech community on very, very kind of specialized programs to educate and train doctors. I mean, in the end, drug companies are there to develop but also market drugs, and of course, a lot of their business model is obviously very much based on chronic diseases. That's where a lot of their money comes from. So I kind of realized, but throughout that career that I had, I mean, it was really great in the sense that I was keeping very up to date with all the latest cutting edge stuff that was happening, with treatments and diagnostics, et cetera, working with great scientists and very, expert doctors, eminent in their field. So it was intellectually very, very stimulating from that perspective in terms of my scientific interests. I did a master's in business, an MBA program in the middle of all this. I took a bit of a career switch. I actually was involved in natural sciences and worked with a documentary film company doing wildlife programs, which is a little bit of a left field thing that I did for 3 to 4 years. But I kind of was missing the kind of the human science and medical science bit, so I kind of went back into it. And but then about sort of 9-10 years ago, I kind of reached the point where I felt I could do something a bit different. And at that point, and I was always fascinated by the impact of technology, because of course, even the days, from doing medical films with cell animators, I mean, of course, we had computers and IT, and then of course the whole tech revolution and all that kind of stuff happening. And of course, there's been so much that has exploded in the scientific arena as a result of all those technological developments. So I got really fascinated by how the impact of technology was really going to hit real people, who could take charge of their health rather than leave it too late, which is what we do now, and see a doctor get fixed. So I thought, I kind of realized that I was getting not disenfranchised, but I could see that the whole industry in which I had developed my career was very much focused on kind of keeping this paradigm around, the sick care model, which we still have. You fix people, you diagnose their diseases, and then you fix them. And I thought, well, I'm really interested in actually the science around health, like how do you stay away from these diseases? So that became more of a preoccupation. I could see that technology would be one of the tools that could be used to be able to really, I guess, change how we think about health and engage people more around their health. So when the timing was right, and this came at a time, when my kids were getting older, they were basically starting to go to university. And I felt I could take some more financial risks, because I've always been quite an entrepreneurial sort of person. I mean, I ran my own medical education agency for about 13, 14 years. It was small, about 15 people, nothing big, but a good size, when I was basically raising kids and also had a husband who was very involved as an editor on a big newspaper. So we hardly saw him for about 7 years. So I had to kind of keep it, relatively controllable in terms of my career to allow myself to focus, obviously, as mum to my 3 kids. But so from that perspective, that, as an entrepreneur, running my own thing, and I've always been very entrepreneurial, but I thought, I was going to do a big sort of pivot away from relying on my income coming from the pharma companies, which are basically, very much, on this whole kind of sick care model of how we see diseases, right? So I started to kind of think, well, how am I going to get involved in this sort of effectively what is a system change shift that we need to be thinking, how is society going to re-gear how they think about health and re-gear the system? Because it is a system that we are living in. We're part of a very complex system, and there are lots of incentives for why we don't change the system. So I kind of was grappling with this big question. And I ended up setting up I run a few micro businesses at the moment, but Collider Health was, I guess, my first foray into this whole new world of system change and new way of thinking about health. And I started, and like anything, and I sort of, I started at the age of 53. I was like, basically right in the middle of menopause, which for many women is a really tough time to be doing anything. I felt I was like this, I don't know if you've heard of imposter syndrome, but I was like entering this tech world as this sort of menopausal woman of 53 in this male-dominated universe, thinking, who the hell am I kidding? I'm going to try and, convince people to kind of work with me in this whole new domain of tech and health and all the rest of it. So it was an interesting time, when I kind of decided to set out on my own. And but I read a book from a dear friend of mine, Andrew Scott, who is one of the leading economists in the space of longevity, actually. And he wrote a book called The 100-Year Life. And I read that book as I was working. The 100-Year Life. And what he was saying is that when you reach, he said we're entering this period when we're no longer living a 3-stage life where you kind of, you grow up, go to school, then you work, And then you basically retire and then very quickly die. You have like 8 years, retire and then you die. Like that was like the old model. And suddenly we're entering this whole new domain where it's a multi-stage life where we have all these different stages. And how do you actually prepare for that multi-stage life? And he made the point that when you're doing a big career switch, and often that does happen at the time that I was doing it, especially for women, they're kind of like, empty nest syndrome. And they're like, what's like the next phase of my life going to look like, And if you're a career woman, it's like, gosh, you've got ageism and it's all that kind of stuff. And like, how do you deal with all these forces? And he said, listen, don't worry so much about the money. If it's, difficult, if you've got a bit of savings, of course you have to worry about the money because we need income and we all need to survive and live and all the rest of it. But he made the point that there's all the intangible sort of assets that you need to be kind of looking at in terms of developing. And I kind of, because I was very, very focused on, I didn't want to rely on my husband, who was always going to be there to support me if everything went completely kaput and I failed as with my entrepreneurial pursuits and all the rest of it. But I was very, very conscious. I've always been used to making my own money. I'm very, very kind of, I guess, a feminist in that sense, wanting to always be able to kind of look after myself. And I don't want to be a drain on anyone. So that was kind of preoccupying me for the first kind of year or so. But then I realized, actually I'm doing something very, very different, very new. And I have to kind of like look at my networks of people who I know. And then, of course, it kind of made me feel a little bit less stressed out. And actually, I could see it as a real opportunity to do something really different. I could be really brave, courageous, very bold. And it kind of just happened and evolved. I didn't have any brand. I was like nothing. I didn't have a big brand name behind me. I was Tina Woods reinventing herself at the age of 53. And it suddenly started to kind of evolve and kind of make sense. And of course, looking back, I see all those early steps where I started to get some very interesting projects. And some of the interesting projects, going back to the credentials question, is I was very, very lucky, but then you also create your own luck. And serendipity, I'm a firm believer in the serendipity of life and to really grab those opportunities as they come to you and to make things happen out of them. And so that's really how I've operated my life, really. And certainly in the last 10 years, that's often how things have happened. And I had I met someone at a conference. They were doing some work in the NHS. And of course, the NHS and the government were basically just starting to look at the impact of AI on our health. And I got involved in a very interesting project looking at, and I was very interested.
How long ago was this, sorry?
This would have been 6-7 years ago now. So healthcare was always quite late to the AI table. And it was just, so I wrote my book, which I know you may ask me about. That was published almost 5 years ago. I would have started.
That was the book about AI and longevity.
Yes.
You published that 5 years ago. Goodness me. Okay.
I was one of the early experts in AI.
Because when you, that's what the point I wanted to make. Because when you said the NHS started looking at AI, I thought, how long ago was that? And you said 6 or 7 years ago. I thought, actually, that's pretty good considering how fast things have moved.
Exactly.
That is pretty good for the NHS. And when you said you published a book 5 years ago, I did not think that. I thought it was a lot more recent. Okay, that's pretty good.
It's quite
early mover there. Yeah.
Well, this is what's so crazy, and this is, I guess, part of the story of my life as I'm discovering, because I've always been one of those people who like to dive in and be first, and kind of like I'm a very curious person, right? I'm very inquisitive, and that has obviously been what I have harnessed and used throughout my journey over the last few years.
With questions the minute you walked in the door. About nothing to do with the podcast.
but literally, so I found myself immersed in basically one of the first projects for the NHS, engaging with government and the Department of Health and all, and of course all the people at Google and like all the startups who were starting to enter into the health arena, coming out of fintech, and they're all looking at health, and I started to get immersed in this world of AI and the startup world. And produced a big report on, because we had to do a big mapping exercise and what are the implications on AI and health care. And so that got me it was like my very quick introduction and very induction into this whole world. And then through that route, I started having a lot more contacts. And then at the time, the government had just injected a whole bunch of money into what they called the Grand Challenge program around the industrial strategy. And one of the grand challenges was the aging society. And the way that they talked about it was very negative, in the sense that we have this sort of the burden of the aging demographic hitting us. We've got all these older people clogging up hospital beds in the NHS. How do we fix this problem? So it's kind of like negatively sort of framed in many ways. And And so they were injecting a lot of money into what they called the Grand Challenge Program for Healthy Aging. So I started working with UK Research and Innovation on the how to find the unusual suspects for this ecosystem, the commercial ecosystem, that they wanted to develop, and find who were going to be developing the products and services to keep us healthy and well, and to age well. Their early focus was very much on the care homes and the assistive technologies to kind of help those who were basically in pretty poor shape and clogging up the hospital beds, to basically reduce demand from that perspective. But funnily enough, the whole way of thinking about that, and I was very involved in that whole kind of way that we're thinking about growing older, we had to turn it on its head and see it through a much more positive and optimistic lens, because that was the way you were going to engage the commercial sector and all the insurance and banks and food companies and retail and so I spent a lot of time, and of course I knew the world of pharma and biotech by that point very, very well, and they were obviously very interested in helping to keep people older, who are getting older, who are getting lots of chronic diseases. There's a lot of money to be made there, let me tell you. But there is also a lot of money to be made in actually how do you keep people healthy and well outside of hospitals? How do you keep them? And this is where
outside of what? Sorry,
out of hospitals and away from doctors.
Okay.
This is so there's a real opportunity. And of course, you look at the plus 50s; they have the majority of the household wealth. And of course, I'm just on the cusp, sort of between, I think, the baby boomers and Generation X. Right, I was born in '64. And, the aspirations and the desires of my generation and the baby boomers are very, very different than previous generations. We've got it good. We've got, longer, lives to look forward to in terms of retirement. And we have very, very different aspirations. And and you could see the flows of money pouring into, areas where the consumer was deciding, listen, I want to have a good life when I'm getting older. I want to, I don't want to sort of end up decrepit. And so what I found interesting was there's a big disconnect between how we see growing older. And of course we have ageism as another big problem. And yet the commercial imperative, let alone the social imperative, was so significant and so colossal that my time when I was working on this huge project with UK Research and Innovation to find, who are going to be those industries that are really going to create this marketplace of products to keep us healthy and well. So I found really eye-opening and very, very interesting. And it led me then to understand that actually from a system change perspective, who is really going to change the system, and create this marketplace? It's going to be the consumer who have different needs and wants. It's going to have to be the policy making, and of course, our public sector. They have to realize that, they're going to have to try and reduce demand on our NHS. But how? And so we need to see the solutions in a very, very different way than seeing it too narrowly focused on just one area, because you have to see it from a long-term perspective. Because certainly in terms of preventing ill health, you do have to see the long-term perspective, because looking after yourself, the outcomes and the benefits of that will only be seen like 20, 30, 40 years on, which obviously is well beyond political cycles, investment cycles. So that's hard. That's hard work to be able to engage a whole system change shift. But what I realized, and I'll stop in just 1 second, you have to engage government, you have to engage policy, you have to engage the big money. Where is the big money? And I'm talking like, big, the insurance and pension funds, they're investing in, now we're seeing, a lot of that investment going into like clean energy and all that kind of stuff. So how do you actually re-gear the system? So that's how I was starting to think in terms of my objective, in terms of how do we get a sick care model to a prevention-based model? So a lot of things were hitting me while I was working with the NHS, and then of course with this other UK Research and Innovation group, after having spent so many years working in the commercial sector. So a lot of things were starting to, I was asking lots of different questions at that time, but I'll take a breath now so you can ask me your question.
But if...
Because it started with credentials. And believe me, my credentials I'm developing as I go all the time, because it's all new stuff. That's the other thing to be said.
Yeah.
You never stop learning.
But how do you persuade the big money and the policymakers and governments to put more effort and investment into ill health prevention?
Yeah.
If it is not in the interests of the pharmaceutical industry to encourage ill health prevention? Because
Well-
that's my assumption. It's
Well,
not.
I
In
don't
their
want to be
interest.
too heavy on the pharma industry because we're always going to need, good treatments and good diagnostics, and of course they've been very involved in vaccines and so forth.
But the
So I don't wanna
healthier the healthier a population, the less money they make.
Well, yes, but we've now got this huge revolution happening with obesity management, with GLP-1 inhibitors, which, the Ozempics and the Wegovy's, these weight loss, jabs that I'm sure you've been hearing about in the press, because they have been, yes, they're making a huge amount of money for the drug companies. That is true. But there's a lot of interest, certainly in the longevity space, to see them. I don't necessarily agree with this, by the way. I think we need to attack the root causes of obesity, which is where I stand on.
Yeah.
But there is nevertheless a lot of interest in the longevity community for the quote unquote longevity benefits of this weight loss drugs, because if you lose a lot of weight, you tend to then get fewer of these chronic diseases, which of course will enable you to live a healthier, happier life. I think where the jury is out, and this is very scientific, where we need more research, is the mechanistic pathways, involved in that whole process where these drugs are working. So I think that's the big area of research that is ongoing, which I won't get too technical. But the point is, and this is where I come in, we have to tackle the root causes of ill health, because the solutions, so the root causes and the solutions are very much in the heartland of all the work that I'm doing, which of course is about keeping healthy and well. And of course, it's linked to the whole planetary health agenda as well, because humans are part of a bigger system. I'll leave that for the moment, because that speaks to a lot of the work that I'm doing now around exposome and all the rest of it, which I'll come on to in a minute. But yeah, I think the food industry is also another culprit in this, because we eat way too much ultra high processed food, junk food. And that is why we're getting so obese. Now, it's not as easy to say, oh, well, just stop eating junk food, because we live in very obesogenic environments. So this is where the behavioral change and the way that humans behave in their environments is so crucial to understand. Because if you live in an environment where you may be poorly educated, junk food is a lot cheaper. It's more accessible in many ways, especially if you don't know how to cook from scratch. If you're having to work two jobs, you rely on convenience food. There's a lot of marketing. These are all the reasons why we end up getting very obese, and especially if we're going into cars all the time, we're not walking enough. So there are many, many reasons why we have the problems in this sort of convenience-led culture, which is basically what is now reducing our health. We live these lives of convenience, and that, of course, is helped by
I think it is as simple as stop eating as much junk food. If you have a state government that supports and pushes that message.
If you can, so this is what I know is this is where governments do have a huge role to play, because they can influence the way that food companies work through legislation, reporting requirements, and all the other things that are hitting, the energy industry, for example, or, environmental, social, and governance sort of considerations in the way that investment is made. There are all sorts of ways that the governments can intervene and create an environment where it is less easy for the food companies to basically heavily market junk food to our children, for example. And we've had other things like the sugar tax, which was a threat, to the industry. They said, listen, you got to reduce your sugar content in your fizzy drinks, otherwise you'll be hit with this tax. And that actually did influence behavior of the drinks industry. So we need more tools like that to really hit us. And the government, in fairness, the current government in the UK is looking at all this. But, we have very, very extensive lobbying from the food industry. So it's tough, and there's a lot of money at stake. And of course, a lot of the supermarkets, they're very, very profit driven. And a lot of their profit comes from junk food and ultra high processed food. Yeah. So, and unless you create a level playing field in a very competitive market of the supermarkets, things aren't going to change.
Yeah.
Because they need to make their money. They are also producing jobs. They are producing income for people. They're producing, so it's very, very complicated. So this is where the system change effort has to be. It is very, very complex. It's not impossible, because it has been done before in other situations, like we're seeing with clean energies, net zero, that there just has to be a will and a way and also an international kind of approach to this, which is, kind of the stuff that I'm involved in my sort of day job. But
can I come back to the weight loss drug a minute? Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
How much do you understand from a scientific point of view on them?
I'm relatively informed. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I know enough to know that.
Okay, if it's all right with you, Tina. Now, I know that, they're a hot topic right now. I know people are using them,
Sure.
but I think like you do, like, hey, your first option should be go the hard route and try and lose weight naturally, right? However, that doesn't stop people wanting to take the easy route and use these things. What's your understanding of them in terms of health benefit, long-term implications? How do they work on the body? Are they change anything which is fundamentally maybe a problem? Can you explain just the basic level?
Again, I don't want to get too scientific, and also
I know nothing about them other than they exist.
I think in many ways, for the people who really need them, so let's just focus on that. For the people who really need them, which are very heavily obese people, like BMI plus 31 or something, I think it is. Body mass index. So you have to be very heavily obese. So for example,
they can't go walking.
Sorry?
So they can't do any exercise.
So it's very difficult for them to, it's much more difficult for them to exercise because they've, let alone, metabolically, but also, weight on their joints, and they probably have back problems. They're beset by problems associated with their obesity. And also it's often linked with depression. It's all, and then of course behavioral, the motivation to do something, then it gets affected. So it's a very, very complex problem. Yeah. And listen, I can understand how difficult it must be for a person who gets into that situation. And there are some genetic and metabolic reasons why people tend to be more likely to get to that point. So let's not forget that either. So I think we have to be very, very careful again about making judgments of people who reach that position in their life when they're very heavily obese. So they do need help. And I think this is where these the GLP-1 inhibitors are a godsend, a lifeline for them, because and that was always how they were intended to be used. So for example, in the NHS, there are not that many people who are eligible for this because of the very specific requirements. The problem that we've got is that they're available on the black market and also in the private health setting, where people who are better resourced, who may not even be that heavy, are using these drugs, right? And that's where some of the problems that we're seeing now, because there are potential side effects. There's muscle wasting, for example. You lose a lot of muscle along with that, which isn't good, especially if you're older.
From these drugs?
Of course, yes.
Well, why is that? How do they work?
It's just... It's to do with the way that, internally, metabolically, and at a cellular level, these things are happening. Don't be
afraid to get scientific here, by the way, because if I don't understand, I'll ask. It's not a problem. So.
I don't want to get too technical, and I don't want to get it wrong either. So I think, but there's lots of information about there, on a very specific scientific level, which gives you. So I think that the point is, like any drug, there are going to be side effects and adverse events, and especially as there's more usage of the drug, and especially for people who may not necessarily be the ones who should be using them, you're going to see more side effects. So that's one of the obvious ones. So, and that is not necessarily a good thing, right?
Early days,
and especially if you're older, because of course, one of the big things that you have to worry about getting older is loss of muscle mass. In fact, it's becoming really increasingly recognized. It's the scientific word, sarcopenia, muscle wasting, muscle mass loss, because you need muscle around your bones to keep you upright, to keep your whole musculoskeletal sort of system in gear. Also helps against osteoporosis, which is the bone mineral density problem. So I think, there are all sorts of reasons why the muscle wasting is not a good thing. But you have, again, it's like all things, you have to weigh up the pros and cons of any drug against the side effects and against the adverse events. So this is where, you need the discipline, and you do need, and this is where it's a good thing that we have, the regulation that we do around drugs, because we need that, to have the rail guards against that. So I think my worry about this is that it is being used by a lot of people who probably shouldn't be using them. And of course, the other thing too is the whole behavioral side is that it is very, very difficult to basically stay off these drugs from a behavioral standpoint, because going back to the root cause, a lot of these people, once they come off the drugs, they find that they put the weight back on. So then you need to be on these drugs for life. And that is not necessarily a good thing. It's great for drug companies because they make a lot of money that way, but it is not necessarily good, for a healthcare system, especially if, people are getting this off the they're going to be hit with that cost. So I think, we have to be very, very careful. And of course, we are seeing a lot of people using them ill-advisedly. There's obviously the whole black market. There are a lot of problems happening, where people, are, and then there's some nasty side effects as well. I mean, that maybe some, are particularly nice as well. But I think the main thing, it detracts from the main issue, I think, is why are people getting so obese in the first place? That is what I'm most worried about, actually, is that it's detracting away from actually really addressing that point. So that's what I'm focused on, to be honest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for that. With just high level, and I appreciate it's not your area of expertise either. So thank you. Okay, let's get on to the topic we were going to talk about, longevity. You were on the icebreaker. You mentioned chronological age. You mentioned biological age, and you mentioned the third one, which is
subjective age.
Subjective age. Please explain these three terms to people.
So, so chronological age is obviously, in terms of years since your birthday, how old you are. So that's quite easy to understand. And we all have birthdays. Now biological age. So that's an interesting term because that is essentially trying to describe your age in terms of how healthy you are. So it's basically an indicator of your health status. And there are all sorts of different ways that you can measure your biological age. And there's no hard and fast rule about that. And this is actually a huge area of research and discussion and debate, because there are all sorts of ways that you can measure your biological age through DNA methylation, your epigenetics, how fast the state of your DNA. So there's that aspect. There's functional biomarkers, like, for example, the strength of your grip at the age of 40, your grip strength, how fat, and they can measure this, how hard you can grip onto something. That is a very good measure of your musculature, your muscle strength, and all the rest of it, and is a very, very good indicator, actually, of how fit you are and how likely you are to live longer and healthier.
I would have thought that would be not a great measure, because some people have stronger grip strength because they do more weight training, for example.
Well, but that's if you read the newspapers, strength and conditioning training, especially for plus 50s, plus 60s, it's like massive. Really important, because you tend to be, if you're doing that, you're going to tend to be more motivated and engaged just generally about your health, and you're probably doing other things as well. It kind of goes hand in hand with your whole kind of outlook, your behavioral patterns, your other habits. When you tend to be doing more weight training, more resistance training. It's all linked up with other stuff, right? In
the same way that you mentioned before, that the positive people tend to be healthier and live longer with the positive mindset, optimists, and opposed to the pessimist, right? The same reason.
It's all linked up. Your state of mind, how happy you are, how engaged you are, socially engaged. I mean, social engagement is, and that links up to being happy and finding purpose in your life. That is probably the most important thing, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But just going back to functional. So functional biomarkers are actually really important, because they relate in terms of how people also see themselves. So your ability so how fast you walk at the age of 45, or is it 46, that is often a very, very good indication of how well you will age in the future. Because if you walk pretty fast, you tend to be more physically fit, you're carrying less weight, so it's a very, very good indicator.
Ask a question on that.
Yeah.
I want to keep asking questions. Do you mean how fast you can walk, or how fast you walk on average?
Well,
I can walk pretty quick, but I tend to mope around.
There's a certain method. Yeah. I mean, there's a certain method of how they assess this, in the kind of the clinical environment. But, and I can't remember the exact parameters, but it's it basically, but you're right. I mean, I if I'm late for something, obviously I will walk faster. But there is a limit I will reach before I then have to break into a run if I'm really, really, but at least I can run, so some people can't run. So those are, and then of course you've got cognitive markers, how well your brain is working, and there are all kinds of different ways that you can test that. And there's there's a lot of sort of blood biomarkers. There are biomarkers that you can measure in your blood, like HDL, high level density lipoprotein. That's good. There's the bad, LDL, that's bad. And those are measures of your innate cardiometabolic fitness. So there's a huge range, and of course there's all these different tests that you can take now, these biological age tests.
How do you measure your biological age, if you measure it?
So, I mean, I've had my biological age measured in various parameters, because of course Oregon age is another one. How fit is your heart, your brain, your lungs. So VO2 max is, again, another functional biomarker. That's a measure of your innate ability to use, harness oxygen and, of course, and expire through your lungs. So I've had my biological age measured in various ways over the years. And in fact, it was the subject of a big article that was released about a year ago, right after the news hit that I'd become a DJ at the age of 60. So it kind of went crazy around the world, this article in Business Insider. But I had so a note of caution, because there's a lot of stuff out in the media that talks about, my biological age is 30 years younger than my chronological age, but it's based on one test. Rubbish. You have to use a bunch of these different tests. Actually, the most important thing is that you have to use these tests over a period of time for you as an individual.
So you've got a baseline at some point.
You've got a baseline, and then you can track your own individual baseline over time. That is the only thing that at the moment is worth its salt.
Right.
Everything else is a little bit...
Who does that? Very few people.
And so I was even a victim to that, because even the article about my biological age reduction, and I can go into the detail about that, which I attribute mainly to the joy in my life and dancing, by the way, and also hormone therapy, it went on the headline, CEO 60, actually 35. Now, that is rubbish, and I would not have written that headline, but that was the headline that traveled.
Good, though.
But it sounds good, because the whole basis of the article and what I was saying in that article was that I had a number of different tests and measures of assessing my biological age over a period of 4 years. And yes, it did show a biological age reduction, because I was able to compare these biomarkers over time. So
where did they get the 35 from then?
So the 35, actually, they didn't go with the lowest biomarker, which is 34, actually, which was my cognitive age. So, my brain health, which obviously that was the one that I was really worried most about, because of the whole assessment that you go through. It's actually quite tough. And, the way that they test I was saying, oh my goodness, this is like really tough. But 35 was my glycan age test. So glycan age is a way that it's basically measuring the glycans in your blood, right?
What are they?
It's a long molecule polysaccharide, I think it is. I'm just trying to even remember the actual scientific term for it. But there's a lot of scientific evidence that shows that it is a very good indicator of your health, and of course of your healthy life expectancy. So glycan age, it's a test that's been out and about.
C-I-N-E,
G-L-Y. So glycan. So if you look up glycans.
G-L-Y-C-I-N-E.
G-L-Y-C-A-N, glycans. So glycans are a family of sugars, basically. Saccharide. So just look up the term, and then you can remind me, because I'm just trying to remember the exact...
Glycans are complex sugars, also known as carbohydrates or saccharides. Saccharides.
Yeah.
That are essential biomolecules found in all living organisms. They are one of the four major classes of macromolecules, alongside proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids, and play crucial roles in virtually every biological process. Glycans are involved in cell structure, signaling, immunity, and many other fundamental functions. I can't see the full long... glycans usually consist of glycosidic linkages of monosaccharides. Okay.
You can see why I forgot the exact bits in the way to say it. Yeah. So it's a very, very interesting area of research, and of course so that's a very good example of a startup who's done extremely well with what they have developed in this way of assessing your biological age. But it's one of a number. So I think that's the point, is that, and there are many, many other sort of organizations around who are very, very involved in this whole domain. But I would say it's an active of huge scientific research and inquiry and discovery. And there's a lot of stuff happening. And the thing is, the jury is out on the best use of these tests. And the point is that it comes down to the best use of these tests for you as an individual as well. So I think that's where it's hugely complicated and complex, very exciting, and a lot more work needs to be done, right? And is a hotbed of research and investment, in the longevity and scientific community. So I had a number of these tests done, and I was worked up head to toe in one of the leading longevity clinics in the world, which is Longevity Center Europe, and I was tested in their clinic in Warsaw. And so I had a good, had a good sort of basket of different biomarkers. But I think the more interesting question, and I think the question that was asked, and I did ask a lot of questions back, why is it that my biological age seems to be reducing over time, right? And I had a snapshot between 56 and 60, right? And so that, I think, is a more interesting question, because I was trying to work out, because in my own personal journey, and of course I was trying to work it out for myself because it also fed into my own kind of professional quest, is, how do people, keep healthier for longer? And I was realizing that, the tests were getting better, even the all the sort of quantified self stuff, all the wearables, like smartwatches and Oura rings and all the rest of it, they were getting better and better. So I thought, now's the time for me to kind of do my own quantified self experiment. So I started engaging with the technology more, because before I wasn't interested, because it was too in beta mode, and like it was all over the place, and but now it's getting better. And of course I have a lot of friends in the sector, and I was getting lots of free gear to try out and all the rest of it. So I was starting to engage with the technology, and then I was starting to get some really interesting data, and I was starting to notice actually that it was starting to influence my behavior, because, for example, one of the big drivers in biological age reduction is your physical activity, exercise. It is the underrated. They often say if that there is a pill that you could take that can make you exercise, that would be the miracle. That would be the miracle drug, and would make a lot of money. It'd be the next blockbuster, apart from the GLP-1 inhibitors. So I could see through the way that I was exercising that was driving down my biological age, according to a particular app that I was using called Humanity, which was essentially an app that aggregates a lot of data sources. So it's aggregating your physical activity that you can get through your smartwatch or Fitbit or whatever it is, your blood test results, your Oura ring, because sleep also is very, very important, quality of sleep, especially for your brain health, actually. So it's aggregating all these different data sets. And I could tell that my physical activity patterns were hugely influencing sort of how my biological age, whether I was growing, the rate at which I was aging was going up or down or whatever. So, and I was really noticing that. And of course, and that actually got me it actually got me to compete with myself, not necessarily with others, because of course there's all sorts of like Peloton and things like that. It's all about, using your peer behavior to kind of keep you going and like, trying to beat your peers or whatever. But I was like competing with myself, and so I would go on that watt bike for another 5 minutes or whatever, and I would see the results of that. So it was actually influencing my behavior, and I thought that was interesting, So I mean, it's not perfect yet. It's not measuring my the food that I'm eating, but I also fast, 4 days a week. I only have one meal a day. And of course, the food that I'm eating, I'm very, very careful with. I do not eat highly processed. I minimize the levels of highly processed food, which sometimes is difficult because actually most people don't realize there is a lot of food that is very highly processed, which you think are healthy because they are marketed as being healthy. And that's part of the problem, going back to the labels and things that, influence people's behavior. Well, food labeling, that's an area that needs to be looked at, I can tell you. So I put it down when I was asked in this article. So because I was saying, well, why is my glycan age going down? And I said, I kind of look at, the 4 years, and I think fasting may be part of it. Definitely my exercise. Definitely the joy of feeling good about my life, and because my sort of having set up Collider Health and all the projects that I was doing, I was really engaged and really excited about the work that I was doing, the people that I was working with, and my stress was much less because I was enjoying and I could choose who I wanted to work with. I didn't have to have bosses that I didn't respect, giving me a hard time because I'm always been a bit maverick, so I'm probably not that easy to line manage. But it's all that sort of stuff, and also having a really good relationship with my husband and my family and my friends, and then my newfound, and then of course HRT was my other sort of newfound thing as a woman, and going menopausal woman. I started taking HRT really late, and funny because I had said to myself, I'm gonna just age naturally, Don't take HRT. I didn't really have terrible symptoms because a lot of men do have very bad symptoms. And actually there's a thing called the andropause now hitting the male population, low testosterone and all the rest of it, which is now becoming more widely accepted as an issue for some men. Well, with women, the menopause, estrogen drops like a stone. Of course, you really suffer symptoms, and many women have suffered terribly with the symptoms of that. It wasn't so bad for me. But then as I was getting more and more engaged with the research on the longevity benefits of HRT, I started to get more interested, and I thought, I'm going to see whether I really should be on this. And then I started getting more involved in the whole kind of the fasting, eating well and fasting. And I started just like getting much more involved in what really is. And of course, I was speaking to a lot of experts in this space, many of whom I interviewed for my book that I was asked to write. I would have been approached about 7 years ago now, because I was, quote unquote, an expert in AI and health. And so I interviewed a whole bunch of these experts and scientists and entrepreneurs. And actually, they were all doing very basic stuff. All the stuff that your grandmother would tell you to do: get your sleep, clean air, see your friends, exercise, don't stress, be connected. So I started doing a lot more of that stuff and then getting more disciplined about it. And I think when I look back, and this was in my article, I said, the one thing, yes, I think HRT had a big impact. And when I started taking HRT, and I do take testosterone as well, which is a thing that, by the way, a lot of women are taking. It's off-label use, but there's quite a significant mini sort of silent revolution going on. There's a lot of women taking testosterone. Yeah. And when you have to be careful, like any drug. I mean, it is, you have to be careful, the dosages and all the rest of it, just like you do with HRT, and you have to find the right sort and, monitor your hormone levels and all that kind of stuff under supervision, which I do. But it made me feel great. And I think with the dancing that I had discovered, again, I went dancing, and this is just post-COVID lockdown stuff. I went dancing with a couple of girlfriends, and it was like an epiphany. And this is before I started the HRT, by the way. I had an epiphany moment. I thought, you know what? Dancing and music is going to be a really big part of my life from now on. I just knew it. It was like a light bolt moment. It hit me, mind, body, and soul. I just thought, oh my God, this is like amazing. And ever since then, I have not stopped dancing. And then, of course, with HRT, and of course, going out with, and of course, I've got my husband involved and with my friends. And now I've got all this whole kind of new thing that I'm doing with Longevity Rave, which we'll come on to, I'm sure. It is all these things together, I think, have just been eye-opening for me as the, individually for myself, at what really makes me feel amazing, makes me have a huge amount of energy, a huge a purpose, vitality, energy, excitement about life. It's all interconnected. Can I
ask a question on HRT? So, in fact, when I think about treatment protocols, medicines, different dietary behaviors, fasting, for example, different behaviors in general, in order to fix some problem, I try and think about it skeptically and think, okay, what are we trying to fix a problem that doesn't exist? So where the HRT is concerned and a drop in estrogen, why? If humans have been like this for a long time, women have been like that for a long time, and the estrogen drops off at a certain age, why all of a sudden, and I mean all of a sudden, I mean in like modern day age, the last 20 or 30 years, if not longer, has HRT been a requirement to take in order to live a healthy life for many women? Is that because we're living longer, so the reduction in that essential hormone, the impact of reduction in that is longer lasting? It impacts women for a longer time because we're living longer. Is that why?
So if I understand your question correctly, I mean, I think there's obviously, there are many reasons why, obviously, well, and humans, and there's a couple of other mammalian species who also go through this, but we're very unique in that sense of the menopause, in that sense, the huge drop of estrogen reduction. And that's partly because of we're no longer needed to reproduce, and actually there are certain reasons there are other reasons in terms of being able to look after grandchildren and all those sorts of things that are part of the fact that the sort of the social community kind of structure as human beings that. But I think to your point about why HRT is a good thing in the society that we have now is very much around, yes, because we have an increasing length of time that we are able to be around, and why not make that time when we're around as good as possible? So we are living in better health, and that we have more energy and more vitality, And because I think, so these are all the pros for HRT, apart from just the fact that, through the period of time that a woman goes through the menopause where the symptoms can be pretty brutal, why not deal with those? But then, of course, through continuing on the HRT, because if you're on the right HRT, there's no, the evidence now suggests there's no real reason why you have to stop. I mean, that's the interesting thing too.
Do you mind if I ask how the menopause affected you psychologically, which led you to going down the HRT route? Do you mind if I ask that?
So
as a man who's completely ignorant to this, by the way.
So there are a few things. So I didn't suffer, for example, like a lot of women suffered terribly from hot flushes. I never really had that. I mean, it was more around, there's a little bit, some women experience like brain fog, and there's also like loss of libido and other sort of dryness, dryness everywhere. So like your skin, your hair, vaginally and all that kind of stuff, right? So so there's a whole kind of range of different symptoms that you can get. So I never had it that bad, and I thought, I could deal with this, and it's like you just suffer through it like anything. But then when I realized, and I guess it was my moment when I had that epiphany of the dancing and the energy, and then I just thought, and especially because there are things around cardiometabolically, and of course cognitive health, and I just thought, what? And then the libido thing, like, why not? Like, just try it out, And so when I did, it suddenly made me realize, gosh, I kind of feel like my normal self again, like how I used to feel in my 20s. That's great. You kind of forget. And I think that's the thing, is that you kind of, it's very easy to kind of like put up with stuff. It's like anything. Like when I go away on holiday for a couple of weeks and I come back to my house, I kind of notice a few things. Oh gosh, I should fix that. It looks a bit ropey after having just come from a hotel where everything's like squeaky new and brand spanking new. And I'm thinking, oh my God, these doors need to be fixed, or whatever. You get used to things and you kind of like put up with it. Do you know what I mean? So I just thought, what? Why shouldn't I give myself a bit of an MOT and a bit of a lift, And then you realize, oh my God, I feel like I did when I was in my 20s. I feel great. So why not? So that kind of, and then of course, then you realize, and then you think, yeah, I'll just keep going.
And there don't appear to be any side effects then? Negative side effects?
So for me, I've had only good side effects. I mean, the fun thing, which is a funny little tidbit, is when I started going on testosterone therapy, I was given too much and I could feel it. And I thought for the first time, this is how a 17-year-old boy feels. This is how my sons probably felt. Like, how can they concentrate at school when they're feeling like this? So that, there are funny little, interludes like that, because you do sex on the brain. I thought, gosh, that's not good. It's too much. So I realized, yes. And I realized I was probably starting on too much. So that, so you have to find the right dosage, obviously, like anything. And I went to the doctor and realized, so there are all these sort of things. You have to be careful, and you have to have a combination that is uniquely tailored to you as an individual, because that's the other thing. And, pharmacogenomics is a big area. We all, and especially in the psychiatric
What's the big area, sorry?
Pharmacogenomics. So how do you actually, how does your internal biology, your genetics interact with the pharmacology of drugs? I mean, that's a whole new field of
Spell that word for me.
So pharma, and then genomics.
Yeah. Pharmacogenomics.
So that's a fascinating area. And that actually is a very interesting link with the whole field of longevity, health and medicine, because the real holy grail is, what is that N=1, i.e. uniquely suited to you? What are the interventions and the combination of things that you need to make you feel great and to live longer, healthier? And it is measurable, that you can really, and again, going back to tracking, right? So that's the holy grail of longevity medicine, because it's very, very complicated. We uniquely interact with our environment, with external stresses, and indeed drugs that are given to us. So, and that's the holy grail. And that kind of is a segue into a hugely interesting project that I'm working on called the Human Exposome Project.
Oh, I've read about that.
Yeah, so maybe I can talk a little bit about that, because I'm very excited about that. And that links back to actually going 40 years ago into my credentials discussion when I studied genetics. And again, I did not do a PhD in genetics. I mean, it was an undergraduate degree, part of a pre-med stuff. But I graduated at a time when the Human Genome Project was just kicking off. And that project, fast forward to the present day, was a massive, colossal, international scientific experiment to decode the human DNA. So how, what is our genetic code? And we thought knowing that would give us all the answers to all the cures for diseases known to man. Well, it didn't give us all the answers. In fact, it opened up a lot of questions. And what it did more than anything was to show that genetics is actually a relatively small proportion of our health. It is. So yes, of course, there's genetic mutations, and of course there are rare diseases, and of course we know a lot about that now. There are a lot of rare diseases now that we can start to look at and devise cures, and that's a big area of drug companies, by the way, and we need that, right? But actually, what has happened more than anything is we have now understood that it's how our genetics respond to the threats and the stresses and the that are hitting our bodies. That's the big area of research that we need, right? And it's the food that we're eating. It's like microbiome, the bacteria in our gut, which influences our metabolism. It's like, the environmental assaults on us, microplastics, air pollution, and, particulate matter, so it's, stress, psychosocial stress, that has a massive impact on our biology and our epigenetics, how our genes express themselves, the phenotype, how the genes express themselves. This is the new understanding that we need to get to grips with, because that will influence and shape the whole longevity field. How we need to assess us, from a biological age point of view. And sorry, I didn't answer your question on subjective age. That is actually how we feel, our subjective rating on how we feel, young or bad or old or good or whatever. And actually that then taps into our mindset or our sense of optimism, how we feel about ourselves. And that, as we're seeing, that actually has a huge bearing on our biology, how optimistic you are, how happy you are, and how joyful you are. And so this is a whole new area of research that I'm really fascinated by and actually trying to measure. So we've now got more and more technologies that actually are starting to find use in consumer settings and not just in a research setting. Because, brainwave activity, you had to wear these very big kind of, headsets and all that kind of stuff, and, wire, the electrodes, attached to a certain place. Now we're finding that, there's new wearable technologies that you can start wearing these right behind your ear, and they can start measuring your brainwave activity while you're mobile. Well, that's going to open up a whole new area of application and use cases, which I'm really interested in. I want to use those for how we can measure how dancing is good for your health, while you're dancing and connecting with other people.
Funny you should say that. I've literally in the last couple of months been part of some developing technology up in Nottingham University, which is a new type of MEG scanner.
A new type of
MEG scanner.
Oh, okay.
And it's new in that the massive wearable with all the sensors on it. It can be worn while you're moving.
Yes.
So traditionally with a MEG scanner, you have to be static. It's all to do with traumatic brain injuries, blast and stuff like that.
Sure.
But it's not ready for medical application yet or anything. But I know what you mean. Well, I was going to ask you a question there, and it was, what the heck was it? No, I wasn't going to ask a question. I was going to point something out. One of the first, you talked about genetics there and the influence on health.
Yeah.
One of the frustrating things that has come about, I think, since sort of awareness of genetic influence on our health behaviors and everything else has become sort of more mainstream, and Joe Public kind of understands that these things called genes, and they kind of influence, stuff like hair color, stuff like predisposition to certain diseases or whatever. There's been, unfortunately, I think, a situation where you get too many people will fall back on that as the reason for their ill health, or the reason for their overweightness, or the reason for they're not able to run very far, or the reason for them being a little bit depressed, or the reason for them being a bit of a pessimist. When in reality, before pre-gene knowledge, it was exactly as you were saying, like our grandmothers would bring us up. Your longevity was entirely dependent on how you behaved. It was nothing to do with genes, because we didn't know about them at that point, right? I don't think anything's changed there.
Well, I think we have more information to start answering the question more carefully, I think, because there are genetic predispositions to certain diseases, and indeed certain mental health conditions like schizophrenia. There are certain genetic susceptibilities. And indeed, even some certain forms of dementia, and indeed certain types of metabolic conditions, which do tend to then make it more less easy to lose weight. So there are definitely genetic predispositions. There's mutations, et cetera, and indeed there are certain genetic mutations that confer extra longevity, as So I think there's a genetic component, absolutely, but I think what we're realizing now is that it's far less than perhaps it had been assumed before. Up to 90% of chronic diseases are completely to do with the exposome, i.e., external assaults on our biology. So that's everything from environment, air pollution, to the food that we're eating, how active we are, psychosocial stresses, things like microplastics, pollutants in the air, the food that we're eating, all that kind of stuff, right? But I would say that psychosocial factors are actually far more important than have ever been realized before, especially in the human system, and we're seeing that play out. I mean, now, with our younger generations being very, very hard hit with psychological issues now. And part of that is linked, it's multifactorial. I think there are certain reasons for that. It's linked to everything from social media, to despair about the world, to, and also things like worries about environmental threats. And loneliness is a massive one because they're
disconnect.
Social disconnection. So it's very, very multifactorial, but we're seeing the real kind of impact of that now. And that's a drain on their health. And we're going to see that play out actually in the years to come. So I think the Human Exposome Project, just to kind of finish that one off, is, I guess, the successor to the Human Genome Project, because it will start to answer all the questions that have been opened up by the Human Genome Project. Why is it that up to 90% is not explained by our genes, our genetic code? It's all these other things. So we need to understand at a uniquely individual level what's going on to really open up the answers to how we as individuals can keep healthy and as well for as long as possible. But also with that insight aggregated up at a population health level, what are the sort of interventions where we're going to have the most impact, which is where government investment should be looking at. So rather than throwing this money constantly at the chronic disease sick care model, how are we actually going to invest and legislate and create more positive environments for people so that we can keep out of hospital? We need fewer doctors. And we have much better lives as a result. And also to deal with this whole inequality issue, which of course is part of the problem too. So we have the situation where the wider systemic inequalities, socioeconomic, education, geopolitical, all these sort of reasons. And of course, now we are living in a world where, access to resources, we've got migration problems, oil, all those sorts of things, right? Which are, the root of wars. These are all the bigger kind of things that, humanity is being hit with, but are all going to impact us fundamentally with our health. And of course, we're seeing it now linked to our wealth, And so that's some of the stuff that I'm doing, with the other hats that I'm wearing, is like, how can you, going back to your question about how do you system change, shift something? Well, we need the health economic arguments. We need that economic case. Because what we're finding, and this is where the Human Exposome Project will start to be able to get that evidence showing you're going to get a much bigger bang for your buck at a national level, at an international level, and at a governmental level by investing in a prevention-led economy where you're keeping people out of hospitals for as long as possible and you're keeping them happier and healthier for as long, for much longer than we are doing at the moment. So there's a lot of new thinking entering that space, and I'm speaking to other nations, other countries who are less, I guess, stuck with some of the perverse incentives that we're stuck with in the UK and certainly in the US, where we've got a lot of perverse incentives that are working against us because we've got a food industry, a pharma industry, we've got cars, this life of, the tech industry, creating all the malaise, with clickbait and all the rest of it, and peer pressure and influence and the whole kind of Instagram generation. These are all the drivers of ill health, actually. This life of convenience. Big tech, cars, food industry, the sick care model that is being perpetuated by all the industries that we know. This is what is driving down our ill health. And there's a lot of money being made in poor health. But now we're seeing it's no longer sustainable because the UK, for example, our economy is being dragged down by our workforce inactivity crisis. We've got people dropping out of the labor market, young people dropping out of the labor market. We've got this huge, long-term unemployed, not being, a lot of it's down to poor health. A lot of it's mental health. A lot of it's obesity. So these are the big things that the government have to crack now. So the burning platform has arrived. I think COVID accelerated attention on that because we could see the wider systemic inequalities. People living in poorer areas, more vulnerable, less advantaged, they're really suffering the health burden. We're seeing this increase in healthy life expectancy, this gap, the years lived in good health. The poorer you are, the more likely you're going to be living in poor health. And so that's really starting to hit home with governments now. And of course, the US are starting to recognize it. Their life expectancy, perversely, has been dropping over the years, whereas weirdly, they are a nation where the percentage of their GDP dollars is about 18% spent on healthcare, which is the highest of any other country, 18%. Yet they've got declining life expectancy. Funnily enough, the GLP-1 inhibitors have started to actually hit that, which is interesting, actually. So it's not declining as quickly, which is interesting, actually. So that's where you do actually have to, there are some good things that have been happening. But again, it's kind of like again, I would say it's not addressing the root cause. So there's going to be a lot of other issues that are going to start to come to roost with that situation where too many people are using them, the side effects and all that kind of stuff. So, there are going to be some other things that play out in terms of the long-term benefits of this. But it is interesting,
One of the problems with, like many different industries or, people's focus on things, looking to find information or to improve upon, when we're talking about health and well-being, longevity, is that the information out there that is available to people when they go and search a term or search a phrase or search how can I be healthier, how can I lose weight, what's the best way to do X, Y, Z is, all seems to be extremely overcomplicated, like deliberately overcomplicated, just and staying away from the simple answers to things like eat better, exercise more, spend time around good people, kind of thing. You were talking about earlier. So the social behavioral side of things, right, which obviously is a big focus. What is a big focus of yours? So what is the research showing on that with regards to longevity, living healthier longer?
Well, I mean, there's a growing body of evidence that shows, there's certainly a lot of evidence that shows that if you're very stressed, and you can see that actually in your blood biomarkers like cortisol levels, for example, you can see the impact of stress on inflammation. And there's a lot of research which shows, that there's a new term called inflammaging, because, if you have inflammaging,
okay.
It's one of the, the process by which, so the inflammatory processes in your body are very, very linked to aging, right? So, and stress will accelerate the inflammation processes in your body, which then accelerates aging. So stress is not good for you. So where you get your stress, and you can see that in your blood, right? So that's a hot topic of how do you measure it and what can you do about it? And the problem is what can you do about your stress? Like if you're in a high, if you're working in the finance industry and you're sort of, you've got a terrible boss and you need the income because you've got a high mortgage, you're going to be a stressed out individual, and especially, and it's like, well, what can you do about that stress? So that's the hard part, because at an individual level, it might be quite difficult for you to solve your stress levels, at least in the immediate term. It may be something you can work on. So I think, this is, I guess, the more difficult parts of being able to deal with high stress levels. But I think what we're finding is do what I think that this is the journey in life that we're all on, is like, do what makes you feel happy and makes you feel good. Reduce the stress in your environment, reduce the stress in your immediate environment if you can, because that's the ideal, right? Now, it may not be as easy as that to do that, because and also
people don't understand how. People do what makes you happy, and people will think, well, if I work more, I'm going to feel better because I've worked more. No. If you're already stressed because of work, I don't think more work is what you need to do. I think they don't because they don't understand themselves well enough.
So that's the process by which, this is the journey of life, isn't it? Understanding what makes us tick. Now, I would say that that's actually one of the good things about older is that you tend to be more wise and about understanding yourself. And that can be very, very helpful because you can then use that insight into, hopefully changing the circumstance of your life in a way that will improve your levels of happiness, right? Now, of course, it makes a huge difference in terms of the people that you surround yourself with. And hopefully, and there is a bit of, luck of the draw in terms of, your future partners and all that kind of stuff. But this is the beauty about life is the, the fact that it can go anywhere. You can be the master of your own destiny to a certain extent and avail yourself and be open to new opportunities and seize on those opportunities. And if you're more optimistic, you tend to do a bit more of that, see the glass half full and all the rest of it. But I think what I would say is that going back to your original question about, what are we finding out about the whole kind of psychology and emotional aspects of longevity, I think what we're finding is it's actually really, really important, really important. And that's the stuff that you won't get through supplements and IV drips and blood transfusions of young blood and all the things that, Brian Johnson is doing. But even a Brian Johnson, and, he gets a lot of flack because, of course, he's got millions he spends on himself. It's not really a scientific experiment. He's using himself as his own guinea pig. And he's putting himself at risk also of a lot of the stuff that he's doing, with all the interventions and what have you. But he will also say that, and this also plays out in his own story about his relationship with his son, which has become hugely important to him, and he recognizes and does speak about loneliness and social connectivity. So I think, that's a credit to him to be able to be open about that, because I think a lot of people do follow him. I tend to have quite a different perspective on his perspective. I don't. I think in some ways I think he has been. I think a lot of people have jumped on the bandwagon to think that all the supplements and the fancy tech that he's doing is what they should be doing for themselves. I would say be careful. Go to someone who can help you really understand, your own, individual makeup and, track yourself and do it properly so you don't put yourself at risk, because there is a lot of unknown evidence about all this sort of, the fancy stuff that is out there.
Have you met him?
I have not met him personally, no. But listen, I see myself as a maverick. I love the provocateurs. We need people like that, and I listen to all of them and I respect them because it's their own joy what they're on. It's their own joy which gives them purpose in their life. That's Brian Johnson's purpose, right? And other provocateurs that I know, I have a healthy level of respect for what they do, even though I may not disagree, I may not agree with everything that they do, but I listen to them. Going back to the earlier piece about judgment, right? You have to. Everyone, I think everyone has a very interesting perspective on this, and you can, and it should be recognized and accepted for that. So I think, but I would say, so I think we are learning more about how important the stress side of this is. I think we need more research to show the converse of like how do you actually really measure how joy and feeling good and feeling optimistic and where you can get that, how that does impact on your life. I think that's where we need more ways of measuring that. And this is where going back to example for, the mobile brainwave activity tracking your emotional state, I think that will open up a lot of really interesting questions and also solutions to addressing like how, if you're stressed at work and if you can see, and if you've got, and if your emotional state improves when you get a new line manager, for example, or a new job or a new career, I think that's going to be a big eye opener for a lot of people to show, like, don't hang around in a stressful job if it's really doing this to your health, because it's really, really, actually really affecting you, and it's also affecting your family as well. So, and also brings down their health. So I think these are the kind of the new frontiers that we are just beginning to really start to understand, because, the government, and rightly so, they're really focusing on how, for example, employers, I'm talking about the UK government now, how they can support, employee health. Well, there's only a limit to what the employer can do, because if you're, going through a messy divorce, and if you've got, stress in commuting, or if you've got a child who's very unhappy at school, I mean, these are all going to be things that your employer really can't do much about. And your employer can't do much about your commuting distance or your stress about the high cost of your if you're living in an area that has poor transportation links. These are all the things that there's limits, to everything. This is where the system change approach is so important. And, and there's a limit to there's that that debate that played out. Should employers have cake at work? Is that good or bad?
Have cake.
Have cake. Allow their employees to eat cake at work. You can get a bit silly about all this, and this again goes back to, well, a little bit of a bad thing isn't such a bad thing. A little bit of booze, if you took booze out of everyone's life, or took chocolate out of everyone's life, I mean, you can go a bit too far with all this, right? In the end, it has to be, yes, a certain amount of agency to the individual, but also recognizing that the environments in which we make our choices are very, very important, and that's where a broader perspective needs to be taken. This is where governments, and organizations, all have to kind of pull together in this. So I think, so if I can just finish off on the Human Exposome Project. So I was really excited about the Human Genome Project as a geneticist, trained in my early days, and really interested when we heard about genetics are only a small proportion of that. So what's next? So the Human Exposome Project. So that's something that I started talking a lot about, actually, the exposome, going back sort of 4 or 5 years now, because it was the perfect framework to describe a lot of the work that I was doing at the time with the National Innovation Center, going back to my credentials, the National Innovation Center for Aging. They're doing a big program around the city of longevity. How do you create urban environments for human health and health and longevity? From a system engagement point of view, working with mayors and working with, local governments and housing authorities and, the punters, the startup world. And the exposome was a really neat framework to describe, fundamentally, if you're trying to create an environment for human health, you have to look at it from a system change perspective, from cells to cities. In fact, I've just literally released a Substack piece about this a couple of days ago. How do you create, because we're now getting more and more of the evidence to show how access to green spaces, noise pollution, air pollution, if you're poor, you tend to be affronted with a lot more of that, less access to green spaces, more noise pollution, more air pollution. And we're now seeing the evidence play out to show that, individuals, and not just at a greater population level, but actually if you measure what's happening at an individual level, which we're now starting to be able to do, thanks to the Urbanome Project, for example, and this is connected with the Human Exposome Project, we are starting to see how impacted we are by these forces. So we need to start really looking at this carefully. And that needs to play out in government policy making and how we, urban planning and all those sorts of things. So this is the new frontier of longevity. So I'm spending a lot more time with property developers, commercial real estate, who are all looking at how do we create built environments for human health and flourishing, because we're now starting to see this evidence of impacts on human health. So this is what the Human Exposome Project is really starting to do at a mass scale, at a very, but connecting up what's happening on the individual level with what's happening at a city, at a national, at a supranational, at a global level, and how, going back to your point earlier about the root causes and solutions of ill health, are completely tied in with planetary health, with air, oceans, plastics, the whole thing, and how do we design, our societies and our economics, reducing reliance on fossil fuels so we have cleaner air, so that we're not destroying our oceans with plastics, which of course are all completely tied in with fossil fuels. And all the whole kind of, the systems around that, the food systems, relying less on ultra high processed food and going back to less processed food. And so it's all interconnected, right? So that's where the Human Exposome Project hopefully will start to get the evidence that will hit government policymaking, will hit, the pension funds, the institutional investors. They'll say, listen, why are we propping up these industries that are actually damaging human health, like the food industry? What is going on here, So this is
the
where
problem is that we accept it. The society accepts it.
But we will start to not accept it because we're seeing that play out. We're seeing, for example, one of the things that we're seeing with the younger generations, they're drinking less alcohol. They are seeing, partly because it's expensive. There's a reason also to do with that. But they are also seeing it damaging their health. And it's also because, and I see this when I spent a lot with some young people in the rave community, in the raving environment, dancing and clubbing, they also don't want to lose control because of the things, the peer influence and looking good. And so there's whole, it's very complicated, all these reasons, which we may or may not go into, but.
It's interesting because I've got 2 young daughters, a little bit younger than your kid. My youngest is 16, my eldest is.
But it's a very interesting age.
My eldest is 20. My eldest is 20. But I over the years, from when they were very young, and I realized like the impact things like social media had on me. I think I got worried about them
Sure.
growing up and how it would affect them.
Yeah.
Also things like alcohol. So when they were young, they spent a lot of time around a pub. The grandparents on a pub, and I used to think, oh, man, this is like not great, because in my side of the family, there's a lot of alcoholism.
Yep.
And so I had these concerns. But as time's gone on, it's to your point, I've observed these like sort of not like these unexpected benefits of these largely negative things.
Yes.
Like I'm sure now there are more young people going to the gym on a percentage wise than there were when I was a kid. I'm sure, like paying for the gym membership to go 13, 14, 15, 16 years. No, that would never have happened when I was younger. Yeah. And now I think, and I would go into the gym and I would see predominantly young girls there filming themselves doing their exercise and doing the same exercise every time. The old hip thrust is the obvious one. They're sticking it on and I'm like, oh my God, it breaks me. Don't go in there just to do that. Yeah. Now my mindset's changed. It doesn't matter. They go into the gym. They're starting a habit there, which is a great thing. All right, it's because of TikTok. But they go in there. Same with the alcohol thing. I think part of the alcohol thing is, as you mentioned, don't want to lose control. But I think also because they've got less reason to venture outside the house to go and socialize and connect with people, which traditionally would have been pubs and clubs.
So
they're not learning that habit at a younger age, and they haven't got a reliance on alcohol and that sort of the reduction of the inhibitions that it brings.
Their social environment and the constraints have changed. I think so. There's a lot in that, and so one of the reasons why. So Longevity Rave, which is obviously one of the things that I'm very involved with now, with you, Carrie, who I know you interviewed on another podcast. So one of the interesting things about that, it's this whole thing about, it's about bringing the generations together. I mean, obviously you, Carrie, she's less than half my age. We met each other on the dance floor.
You mean she's not 61 as well?
She's not 61. She's 28. But age never factored into why we know each other and why we became friends. And it was our shared energy and our shared love for music and dancing that brought us together. So it was never, age, this is the point. Age shouldn't factor into anything, I think. I mean, this is why I hate the labels that we attach. And I think actually ageism is more an issue in the plus 50s. I think the younger generation don't really care about it. And this is what I've been finding about it. And what I find when I go raving, we never get sort of comments like, why are you here? You're like old, I've never received a comment like that. It's more around, it's great that you're here. Like,
I remember seeing older people when I would go out clubbing when I was young and think, that is awesome. Check out those two.
And more than anything, funnily enough, because now that I got my husband out with me, my husband, who I've been married for 28 years, but together for 35 years, they think it's great that we're out and they can see that we're still in love with each other. They're like, wow, I want to have that, when I'm your age, they think it's great, know. And by the way, I don't just dance with my husband. I dance with lots of people on the dance floor because that's what raving's about. And that's how you, Carrie, and I met. And so it's very intergenerational.
You met on the dance floor?
We literally met on the dance floor because we had this, we love dancing and we had this energy connection. And I'm fascinated by the energy between people, which is what you do get on the dance floor. And that's actually something that I'm trying to understand through a scientific experiment that we're trying to unlaunch in the next 6 months. Unleash, I should say.
Do you mean, when you say energy, you mean that unspoken connection when you're both dancing at the same thing, you're aware of, I'm guessing, you're aware of each other's presence, you're aware that you're doing something together, but you're not side by side, you're sort of in the same space at the same time, but you're enjoying the same music.
It's a whole frequency aura energy field. This is what I'm really fascinated by, which is the subject of the science experiment that I've designing and speaking to people about at the moment, and why the mobile brainwave activity measurement is really, really important in terms of tracking how you can actually see pre and during and post rave, right? As well as all the other biomarkers that we were talking about in terms of measuring your health. So and I think, but one of the things that, so when you, is it worth talking a little bit about the story behind Longevity Rave? So going back to my epiphany moment, age 56, I've got to dance and music's going to be really important in my life. Then met you, Carrie, just because I was dancing a lot and that's how we met. and we became friends. I went through. I had to have foot surgery. This is now about a year and a half ago on both my feet, and they had to be done at different times because they were really deformed. I don't want to go into the reasons why. It was progressive, bunions, but then worse than that. It was, and I used to wear, and basically my mobility was going to get impaired if I did not fix my feet. Okay.
Right.
And so I knew I wouldn't be able to dance because even when I was out raving, like after 5 hours of dancing,
the bones fused.
So one.
We don't have to go into detail.
Well, they became so my toes started to two of my toes started to dislocate, and then my big toes went so inward that basically they were useless. And then it was on my it was the three smaller toes on the external edges of my feet that were bearing all my weight. Right.
Oh wow.
So and even though I'm quite lithe, it still it created a lot of pain because your little toes weren't meant to absorb all that weight, especially if you're bouncing on them with raving 5-6 hours, which is what I was doing. So I was getting in real agony, and then it was starting to affect my knees, and then mountains. I do a lot of mountain climbing as well with my husband. And I just knew I had to get my feet fixed. So I've been putting it off. I finally found the right surgeon. I was thinking, oh God, then the recovery period, because I was worried about them ruining the surgery.
It's 9 months, is it not?
Sorry?
For that kind of surgery, about 9 months?
Well, they say it takes up to a year to become back to normal.
But you're you're pretty much off your feet for 6, right?
I was told that it could be anything from 3 to 6 months, not off your feet, but you'd have to, you wouldn't be able to do all the stuff that you really love to do. It would take at least 6 months to go back to dancing. So I thought, how the hell am I going to cope with that? So that was what was worrying me more than anything. My initial worry was to find a surgeon that wasn't going to screw up, and then basically make me, So I finally found a surgeon, does all the Olympic athletes and professional tennis players and footballers. I thought, well, if he can do them, he can certainly do me. So that was no longer a worry. And but then it was the recovery. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to learn how to mix music, and I'll get close to my music, whatever. And I mentioned this to you, Karen. She's like, oh, well, I've been wanting to learn to DJ. Well, why don't we kind of do this together, sort of thing. So we did, and she learned more. I learned how to mix, from my, with my feet up and recuperating. And then 6 months later, and of course, I recovered actually much quicker than I thought because I'm so healthy and did my physiotherapy, and so I'm sure that was helpful, my recovery. And we ran our first gig called Longevity Rave. So we invite all our friends and the longevity, a lot of the longevity circle and the scientists, they're all ravers anyway. So we had this big.
Are they really?
They are, yeah.
Why is that?
Because there's a whole other area around, which is not a surprise. The whole there's a whole aspect, going to your point about the whole psychology of longevity. Psychedelic research is booming. It's now going mainstream.
Done a lot of interviews on it, yeah.
It's really interesting, and I started looking into it for a couple of reasons. Partly to do with one of my sons. Well, two of my three sons. Well, actually, all of them. They're all suffering from mental health issues. I mean, I think most of the younger generation do. So I was kind of looking at all the research and trying to help my sons, with some of the issues that they were dealing with, like a lot of their peers. And I started getting interested in psychedelic medicine because of that reason. Because, there's the whole microdosing. Then, of course, psilocybin is being studied in PTSD, and of course, ketamine is being studied in severe depression. So there's been a huge resurgence of psychedelic medicine research in the classic mental health disorders. A lot of investment, and it's really going mainstream. So it's not kind of tinged with a, losing control and the whole kind of hippie and all the kind of stuff that kind of destroyed its reputation for many, many years. And, it's now going to FDA, clinical trials. So it's actually really going mainstream now. So and of course, a lot of the longevity research community are all in that space, right? And of course, that, the raving community and, the club community, there's a lot of, it's all linked with that. But of course, the other part of that is the whole sober and clean rave part of that as well. Mm-hmm. Not alcohol, no drugs, get your sleep. It's there are two facets to it, basically.
That's
and of course,
one of the things that attracted me to Longevity Rave.
Yeah.
I stopped drinking about a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And I was never big into raving anyway.
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who, sorry to jump in there. I'm one of those people who, I'm like a fish out of water when it comes to dancing. And it's because I'm super self-conscious. I think, I I don't like doing it. And the only way I'd be able to do it in the past would be getting pissed out of my face.
Sure.
And then able to do it that way.
Yeah.
Until recently, randomly at a sober wedding in Portugal where they were all salsa dancers and stuff. And I ended up getting on the dance floor. But being able to enjoy dancing.
Yeah.
Like as if I was drunk doing it, but I was sober doing it. Swallowing my pride for a bit. And just connecting with people on a dance floor I didn't know and just, oh man, it's such a good feeling. It's such a good feeling.
So that is the euphoria that is what I'm trying to understand with the scientific experiment, right?
Okay.
Because people will tell you, and so there's so many aspects to this. So sober, I don't know if you've heard of ecstatic dance. That's become quite a trend. Ecstatic dance.
No.
And it's linked to sober raves. And what ecstatic dance is, it all is about releasing your inhibitions for a lot of the reasons why people don't dance, right? So it's an environment where people can feel safe to release their fears about being in a dancing environment. Because I can tell you, my husband, who is now a proper raver, I mean, we go raving all the time, and he absolutely loves to dance. He was terrified of doing it the first time because he was like this scared dancer. He was like worried about like people looking at him. He'd never, he wasn't sort of, he was a bit shy, in his 20s. So he never danced in his 20s. Now he can't stop dancing. So I think there's a whole bit around how do you relinquish your inhibitions. So I think the sober rave, the ecstatic rave movement is all about creating a safe space where people don't have to worry about that, because a lot of other people have worried about it. So it's like creating a place where you just don't have to worry about it, So I think that is a really fascinating area of research, because what people will also tell you is that psychedelic medicine is the shortcut to achieving that state where you don't worry about your inhibitions, your anxieties, your worries, right? Because so that's the shortcut. And so people who are very expert at meditation, achieving that state of being able to feel that you can release your inhibitions, that sometimes, that is, you're getting into that zone. So people who are expert at meditation, for example, they don't need the psychedelic drugs because they can reach that space that a psychedelic drug might help you with more quickly, is often how it is described. But what I'm saying is that there are so many ways that you can reach that state where you don't need the booze or the psychedelic drugs to be able to feel comfortable, to feel great, to feel alive, to feel in this state of just heightened euphoria.
Yeah. So
that's what the scientific experiment is trying to understand. Like, why is it that environment enables you to reach that? So who's running that experiment? So this is what Longevity Rave is now trying to get off the ground with all my networks and the people that I know.
You're leading that.
And of course, the very important hat that I wear is the International Institute of Longevity, where I'm very much involved in this cutting edge research of this new frontier of longevity, which is about how all the stuff that we need to understand how it impacts the human system at an individual level, how we need to factor that into the offerings of all these longevity clinics, the wellness retreats, the spas, all who are looking at this space of like creating environments for human flourishing. What are the interventions that we need, which will make people feel great, will make them feel alive, will generate the health outcomes that matter most to them, which are also not going to fleece them with a lot of money, So that's a whole new space that is at the heart of all the work that I'm doing with the International Institute, working with cutting edge researchers, scientists, working with leading clinics around the world, and factoring in maybe music and art need to be part of the intervention, that clinics should be supporting. And, we've got social prescribing in the NHS now. GPs are allowed to socially prescribe things like gyms, access to, psychological counseling, all those sorts of things. So this is part of a new zeitgeist, which the government and through the NHS through social prescribing, but also through other routes, we're really starting to understand there's this whole kind of menu of things, that we should be making more easy to get, cheaper, more effective, needs to be factoring in our zeitgeist, how we think about our health. So this is really, big stuff.
No, it's fascinating. It's a bunch of people I want to connect you up with if you haven't connected up with some of them already. And And a couple of them are on the psychedelic research front,
Yeah.
but London based,
Yeah.
or around near London. But one of them also, they're both also involved with therapy things as well. So I think a crossover there of your understanding and knowledge around application of rave, dance, society in terms of what they do therapy to help people who aren't very well.
Yes.
And on the flip side, the understanding for yourself on the psychedelic front. So are you connected up and it's a few plugs for these people as well. Jo Neal. Have you ever heard of Jo Neal?
No, I haven't. So.
Okay, Jo Neal. I thought of her when you were talking on the icebreaker. And the reason I thought of her when you were talking on the icebreaker is because, now what did you say? Are you talking about what's a life worth living, the meaning of meaning of a meaningful life, and all the rest of it? And Jo Neal, she worked for I think 30 years in the pharmaceutical industry. She worked for a pharmaceutical company. I can't remember the terminology, but she was trying to develop drugs to help to better treat illnesses, right? And then after 30 years, basically discovered a little bit more about psychedelic therapies and the impact of psychedelics and basically thought, I've literally wasted 30 years doing this stuff, which I don't think is true. That's how she describes it.
Sure.
I wasted 30 years. What we're doing is completely switch to psychedelics. She's London-based, amazing woman. Grace Blest-Hopley, have you heard of her?
No.
Okay, Dr. Grace Blest-Hopley, so psychedelics researcher, scientist. But from the female perspective, so she is doing a huge amount of research and has got an organization which is focused on using psychedelics to specifically for specifically research where women are concerned and treatment where women are concerned for things like the menopause and other things.
Yeah.
Both these women are amazing people, right? The third one is a guy called Keith Abram, who runs a charity called over here in the UK called Heroic Hearts. Heroic Hearts provide psychedelic retreats to treat ex-military with acute mental health issues.
Interesting.
The fourth person, and this one is time sensitive,
yes,
is a guy called Howard St. John Smith. Howard St. John Smith, he runs a rehab center in Bali.
Right.
He's a British guy, suffered with real bad alcoholism, turned his life around, set up his rehab center in Bali, but it's very different.
Yes.
And it's the results, I think the rate of relapse on average for someone going to rehab is something like 40% will relapse, go back into bad habits. Their rate is something in the region of 8 or 9%, I think. It's incredible. He's over in the UK right now, though.
Oh, right.
For a few weeks.
Oh, interesting. I'd love to meet him.
I think he would be interested in hearing about your research and findings on the social behavioral side of things and the rip. Because to me, I think, stick that in as a part of the rehab course. Get some raving in there. Some sober raving. It'd be amazing.
Well, do you know what? I tell you, I've had, so initially, just going back to Longevity Rave, and it became super popular very, very quickly, partly because when the Sunday Times found out I had started to DJ at the age of 60, they got very excited about that. So they wrote a story about that. And then that piece, the Business Insider, they were literally just about to publish this piece about my biological age reduction.
35,
and that piece went. So then when that media kind of went out, then I started getting all these inquiries. Initially because I do a lot of speaking on the international conference circuit at longevity conferences. So I was getting a lot, can you do a longevity rave after the conference is over, sort of thing. So we ended up getting quite a few gigs that way. But then we started getting gigs other ways and started to play much more in the mainstream arena, for example, at the House of Cocoa. So Cocoa being one of the big, top clubs in London. We've done a couple of raves there, all tied in with their whole thinking about getting people back into the clubs. To your point about young people, who don't go out anymore, this whole idea of a rave can be good for your health and you can get the people back into the clubs is quite an interesting idea, which is actually how some of the other clubs have started offering like the day raves and the sober raves and all that sort of stuff.
And because it's sober,
yes,
you can start those raves early. One of the things I liked about one of the longevity raves is it's 6 p.m. I think I saw it start. I thought that is more accessible for me. I don't want to stay out for a rave until 2 in the morning because that's the time everyone gets smashed and they're ready to go to a rave. Like someone at 6 o'clock, not to do that. And that means that you can monetize these spaces that otherwise are not being monetized.
So it's interesting because the longevity rave that we ran in San Francisco it was in December last year. So that was it was the after party of one of these longevity conferences, and we ran it. It was 7 till 11, so it was relatively early. And we had 2 pieces come out from the San Francisco Reporter that covered the rave. And of course, they went hard in the fact that it was held at a place that did not serve alcohol. And it ended at 11, so you could get your sleep. So there are a lot of longevity enthusiasts, and quite the purist community are very, very hard on getting their sleep, of course. So it sort of kind of like went in on that angle quite heavily. So it's interesting because, yes, I mean, Longevity Rave, as a Longevity Rave, I mean, we do all sorts of different raves at different times, right? So we've done them early, we can do them late. So we're not like purists about the timing. But it comes down to the trigger and the context for why you're hosting the rave in the first place. But what I want to do more of is kind of, I would like to do more raves because I'm getting a lot of inquiries now from hotels and spas and retreats and things like that. So the longevity rave is part of the experience, the health and wellness experience over a weekend, for example, or as part of an experience that you get, maybe linked up with, maybe you get, you're getting your Casino longevity clinic, and maybe the rave experience is part of the offering. So there are all sorts of different scenarios that we're kind of looking at now, to look at, where is the place for longevity rave. So, but it's all interesting. But I think the differentiator for the longevity rave is looking at the science behind it and packaging it up. So it's basically trying to do more for your health and well-being, and understanding why.
Mm-hmm. But the people who have come along to the longevity rave so far,
yeah,
is a part of those events trying to educate and communicate to them. I don't mean actually in the event, hey, stop the music, we want to give you a little PowerPoint presentation. Communicate to them the science behind it, the benefits to it.
So it's a good question. And I would say a big part of longevity is the community that is part of it, right? So the way that it started, so it's got an interesting mix. You've got sort of the people who like to go raving, you've got the longevity scientists and the entrepreneurs. You've got the more of what I call, the health and wellness kind of part of that, which could be running clinics or, gyms or, things like that. But our community is starting to broaden out a little bit, just because we're just out and about and we're doing more gigs and things like that. But I would say that the core essence of the feeling that you get when you come is there's that constellation, that collision of people who in the end are quite bound by this idea of new thinking in this whole space, of health and wellness, what it means, right? So I think that's the interesting constellation of communities that we bring to it. So it does have a certain feel. And of course, there's a bit of the old and the new, I guess, if I can call it like that, because one of the interesting perspectives that we had when we did our first rave was an interesting mix of the younger crowd and the older crowd. The younger crowd didn't even notice that there were older people there. It was the older crowd who made the comment, oh, there's a lot of young people here, because they were probably thinking that it was going to be some sort of nostalgia kind of kick. That is not us at all. Like, we do not do nostalgia, because a lot of people, to get them out, they want to hear tunes that they used to listen to in their 20s. That is not what we're about at all. Because what we do is it's about a new experience. It's like the new music. It's like learning something new. I've
listened to a bunch of the sets on SoundCloud since interviewing Yukari. I've literally at home, when I work from home, I can't work to music that I know the lyrics to.
Yes.
Like, I can't focus. So I put on music that's got the lyrics.
Yeah.
But it's like it's good. So when Yukari came on, before she came on and after, SoundCloud, Longevity Rave, get playing just on permanent. So good.
But it's interesting because so it's sort of like but yeah. So it's very, very interesting. So I think so we have an interesting mix generally at most of the raves. I mean, obviously every rave is a bit different, and obviously it depends on whether it's an after party for a longevity conference. But what I always say, if I'm running so the next after party for a conference I'm running is actually on the 2nd of October in Madrid. And I always say, mix up, get the conference crowd there, but mix it up with another crowd or two, or the other networks, to mix it up a bit. So you get an interesting constellation, an interesting collision of people. And that tends to be the format that works really well. So you kind of, so the conference, so you're mixing new and old, different perspectives, so get the clubbing crowd, because that also deals with the question of like, because if you're dealing with the, for example, the club that will be at in Madrid, they have their clubbing community. So you get them involved as some of the crowd. They'll be there, for Longevity Rave. They'll be interested in just raving. And then you get your conference crowd. They'll be interested in the longevity message and the science and all the rest of it. But they may not have been raving for like 20 years or ever. And they're thinking, bloody hell, what's this going to be all about? Yeah. But then they don't care because they've got loads of other people there dancing. To your point about it reduces the worry. Because everyone, do you know what I mean? So it's those sort of elements. Safety in numbers, exactly. And then people just forget, and then you're bound by the energy thing, which is fascinating. So there's that kind of secret ingredient that's kind of like the magic dust that seems to be the Longevity Rave as well. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's interesting.
How are you going to approach that research on that energy connection between
this is a work in progress. So I'm speaking to a lot of people now in that field who are all kind of looking at this, and it's very undiscovered, pioneering territory. That's the whole point.
I agree.
So and also because it's only now that we're starting to be able to even measure it and track it. So that's the other interesting bit. Like how do you track emotions and like how you feel and even like energy fields and things like that. So it's all new stuff, right? So this is the interesting bit, the pioneering bit that we're kind of entering here. And also what are the different biomarkers that we should be looking at pre and post rave, like, cortisol levels, serotonin levels, all that kind of stuff. So it's a work in progress, and we don't have all the answers yet because we're designing it as we're hoping. So, we're hoping to actually run the first kind of, I guess, protocol in December. So watch this space.
Nottingham Uni, where I did that trial with that Meg device on steroids where you can move with it.
Yeah.
That is actually in a room where you've got audio and visual cues and space.
Well, maybe we should look at holding a rave there. I'm being serious because...
when I say room, it's a small room. You're talking 2 or 3 people where it is at the moment.
Well, it could be that some of the pre and post testing can be done. But yeah, these are all the things that we're looking at. So for example, we've got a rave happening in London, actually on the 20th of September in East Hackney, Hackney Wick, at the Not For Sale Gallery. And that's going to be an interesting experiment with the visual and...
is that Longevity Rave?
That is Longevity Rave, but it's part of the Longevity Rave collective group that we're part of. But we're hosting it at the Not For Sale Gallery, and it will be a clean rave or sober rave. We're experimenting with the visuals and the whole kind of the sound of it, because we're speaking to a few people, and this again is one of the elements that we're looking at as part of Longevity Rave. I'm working with a group called the Sound Nutritionists who develop sonic recipes for health. So they and it's all down to frequencies like alpha waves, gamma waves, and things like that.
Okay.
And there's been a whole viral campaign on Instagram. I don't know if you've seen it, how so-called house music, i.e. BPM between 120 and 130, slows down aging. Now, I am still looking for the piece of research which they keep on referencing, so I haven't found it yet, and it's good for your health. So I'm really fascinated by looking at that because if we can develop sonic recipes or tracks that can be scientifically proven to help your health and well-being, I think we're onto something very, very big. So that's another area that we're looking at,
People will be listening to this, I guarantee it. If they're of this mindset and would think this, if they've got this far, they'll be thinking, what are you talking about? You were talking nonsense. But it makes total sense when you pull it back to the things we were talking about earlier in this conversation. Like was it the Exposome, the Exposome Project, and that external, external environment you stimulate, and how much of an impact they have on how long are you going to live and how happy you're going to be and how healthy you're going to be. And absolutely, one of the key things about external stimuli is sound, right?
Yes.
When I grew up in South Wales in the mountains and the valleys down there, and when I go from here. I'm going back home the weekend after next. Weekend after next. When I go home, it takes me up to 24 hours to adjust to silence.
Yes.
My parents are obviously elderly. I go home, so there's not a lot happening at home. They just, they people with not a lot of stress. They relax. But also, you can hear a pin drop because we're in a valley. There's one road going through it. There's not a lot of footfalls, not a lot of vehicles. It takes me time to adjust. But when I adjust, oh my God. It's like
Yeah.
Why do I not exist like in this every single day?
Yeah.
It's the same as when my previous guest earlier this morning we were talking about he's spent a lot of time in Africa,
Yeah.
and going out to Kenya and things like that, and going and being in the wild and the outdoors. Like, it's one thing. It's one thing to go there and how good that feels to be there.
Yeah.
But part of how good it feels to be there is because of what you're not around anymore.
Sure.
The concrete jungle.
Of course.
The manic noise.
Yeah.
The visual stimuli everywhere that you can't get away from. The
Yeah.
constant, like, this unspoken, unseen pressure that exists.
Yeah.
You know, so I totally believe music can have an impact on it.
So, and you've talked, so the interesting paradox or contrast that you just, so I also love nature and the mountains. So another thing that I do with my husband, I love going up mountains. So I was in Pakistan last year in the Hunza Valley, which was amazing.
I was thinking Brecon when you said that.
I also love Brecon. I also love the hills there. No, so that feeling of the proximity to nature and just the wonder of nature is just so powerful, right? And that connection with the universe, you know, and something bigger than yourself. It's just a really powerful feeling. Like, it's really powerful. And of course, I spoke earlier about all this, the research that shows how access to green spaces and that closeness to nature is actually, and noise pollution, you know, it is really powerful. It powerfully affects all of our health, right? Mm-hmm. But going back to the rave environment and the power of music, but also, it comes down to that human connection. And this is, again, what the science experiment is trying to understand, is that sense of belonging and feeling that energy and that communality of people, that consciousness. That is a very, very powerful thing, which I think we have lost in this digital age, which is why I think is that connectivity and bringing people together. And like just the kind of the rituals and the ceremony, like what we used to do, like around fire, and music has been with humankind for, well, ever since we existed. It's like, it's almost like, you know, going back to our ancestral roots and it's this primal thing. It's this very primal connection that you get, which again is part of us being human, you know? So I think there's a lot in that, which is obviously what I'm trying to understand through the science route, just because of my background and my interest and who I am. But it's very, very powerful, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's a common experience, common understanding.
Yeah.
You experiencing something, you know, if you're there and you experience something that is impacting you emotionally, positively or negatively, and there is someone or other people there experiencing that too, you develop this unspoken bond. You know, and even if you didn't know that person was at that event or that event, wherever it happened, but you met them at a later date and found out that they were at that event with you. I'm not talking about music event. It could be a music event. It could be a longevity rave. It could be a firefight in Afghanistan.
Sure.
It could be a major incident in London. You know, and you find out that they were there. You immediately feel closer to that person.
Of course,
you have this connection to them immediately.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know, it breaks down barriers immediately because you experience the same thing in the same way, but from different perspectives, you know?
Exactly.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. Well, yes.
Okay. I've got a few questions for you.
Yes.
I'm conscious of your time. So I've got a few questions for you I need to go through here. If that's okay with you.
Yes, of course.
All right. Let's have a look. I've got my notepad and I've got a question in the YouTube chat as well. Okay. You mentioned in the icebreaker about what makes a life worth living, meaning of life. What makes a life worth living to you? How do you define purpose for yourself?
So, boy, that is an interesting and very difficult question. I think, purpose for me is just, I think it is about deriving real inspiration, love, and joy from the people around you. Ultimately, that's really what it's about, and being able to give something of you back, you know, in that kind of, that sort of, well, it's an energy thing, isn't it? It's that energy field. And I'm very, very lucky that, you know, I'm very happily married. I've, my partner, my children, my friends. And I just find the power of community and the power of being able to do things with other people so exciting, right? Because a lot of my work, that I'm doing now is all about just doing amazing stuff with a lot of people. Breaking molds, breaking the boundaries, convention, exploring new ideas. In the end, it is about people, really. And so I think, purpose for me, yes, I mean, obviously, I seem to have been lucky enough. I mean, some people never find it in the way that perhaps I describe it, but I feel I'm doing something meaningful in terms of understanding some of the big questions in life, like why do we exist? And that's, and obviously I bring in my scientific interest in that. What spurs people on? And that is around really understanding people's motivations, inner psychology, and I find it fascinating kind of bringing these strands together. And again, this is why I think this whole new career in a weird kind of way, which I would never have imagined, 5 years ago, even a year ago, it's this whole kind of bringing the science with the people and, that whole kind of understanding of what is human flourishing? What is it? What does it mean to be really happy and to flourish as a human species? And so,
as a species or at an individual level,
just for all of us, I guess I'm, I'm on my own sort of personal journey as part of that. But I like, what is it that, spurs us on and makes us want to live longer and healthier? So it is, I guess, a little bit about that, understanding the meaning from a scientific perspective. And I think it seems a bit of a wishy-washy answer, but
it's a difficult question.
It's a difficult question, yeah.
When I had, I did part of my own mental difficulties over a number of years. One of the things I struggled with for a period of time, and actually is one of the reasons the podcast was born. I was trying to find a way to give myself purpose.
Yeah,
the podcast didn't give me that, but this is one of the reasons it came about. I was like, fucking hell.
Yeah,
and then actually, I learned later on that that concern about having a lack of purpose that I perceived to have lost when I left the military, as many of us do, perceive it to happen.
Yeah.
That concern had gone away. I hadn't answered the question of what's the purpose of me now? What's my value? The question just went away. And it's because I started living a bit better. I started taking a bit of concern of myself. I started giving myself value through just give a little targets and achievements, set myself targets and achievements to make myself feel better. Making the bed, for example, doing the dishes, going to the gym, physical exercise, all these little things, being around better people. But the reason I mention it is I don't think you can give yourself a sense of purpose. You can't artificially assign my sense of purpose is going to be this Longevity Rave, because it wouldn't. You don't just plug it in. That's my sense of purpose. I'm a robot. That's going to achieve. I think for everyone, I think in reality what it is that the meaning is to be a positive contribution to society on average. You are good for the tribe as opposed to bad.
Well, that's probably a very good way of describing it. Yes, sort of net positive.
Yeah, net positive.
Net positive gain to society. Because
I've made some major mistakes in my time. So it's got to be net positive, right? Not always good, most of the time good. If that makes sense. How do we get onto that? The meaning of life. Yeah, it's a tough one to answer.
It is a tough one. And I guess it's to rise above your own ego also. It's sort of like because what I hate about a lot of the way things are described, and even in the longevity, it's all about you. It's all about you as an individual. So I'm much more interested in the we, right? It's like
well, you can't mention that interestingly about Japan.
Yes.
In that, did you listen to the episode? You probably didn't know.
Not in its entirety.
So
no.
Interestingly, but you'll know this from speaking to her anyway. Interestingly, she said that one of the problems with Japan is they only focus on as an individual, they're told to focus on everyone else first, themselves second.
Yes.
Where it needs to be both.
It needs to be both. You're right. You're absolutely right. It needs to be both. And that's actually a very interesting way and good way of describing it. That's probably why you, Karen, and I get along so well. But yeah, no, it's absolutely. So I think there's this collectivism thing that is,
a dangerous term. Yeah.
Well, it's sort of, but yeah, because I think we're entering
I
in a
think
whole.
Stalin, when you say collectivism, I think the gulags.
Oh well, yeah. So maybe that's not the best. That's not the best imagery.
Well, I'm just finishing off 1984.
What I mean by that is because I even see it in the whole health domain. Is that we know that actually the actions of a lot of us are actually impacting us as individuals. So we're kind of entering in this kind of new collective health rather than individual health. It's not only about and this is where I think we had that discussion about yes. It's easy enough to say that what we do should, eat less, exercise more, our own agency, but actually it's more complicated than that is the point. And that's what we have to understand and actually then hit government decision-making and all those kind of things. So I think that's the interesting point. But yeah, I mean, listen, this purpose in life, we're all in this journey of life, trying to find meaning and purpose in our life, and obviously I would say like a massive part of my purpose in life. And this will be one of the things that I will say on my deathbed is that I'm really happy that I think my sons will be good, decent, happy human beings. That to me is like the most important thing. And that's kind of a biological, in the end, my job is done. If I have left 3 children, who are going to be decent, caring, kind, even though it's been rough, as part of our, we all go through the rough times in life trying to work out our own journeys. But that and also having a really wonderful relationship with my life partner. I mean, if I can just leave with that, that's pretty good.
I totally agree. If all I want, for my daughters is for them to be good people. That's it, because all else follows.
Yes,
right?
Of course.
Be a positive contribution to the tribe.
Yeah, exactly.
It ain't going to work out too bad for you.
Exactly. Exactly.
Tina, it has been a real pleasure, as I thought it would be. I'm so glad you gave me all your time today. What are we on? I've had you for nearly 3 hours.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great conversation.
Okay, so Longevity Rave, the website is longevityrave.world.
Longevityrave.world. And yes, we do have gigs posted up there. And yes, you can email us for tickets and all the rest of it. But generally what we do is we promote on Instagram, when we've got details on tickets for the upcoming gigs.
Okay, I've got the events in front of me. So 18th September, Oxfordshire. 20th of September, Hackney Wick. 2nd of October, Madrid, Spain.
Yes. And there's a couple others brewing, but we'll put them on the website when they've been confirmed. But yes.
And it's longevity.rave on Instagram. How can people follow what you're doing? How can people buy your book?
So I'm on Instagram as tina.technotic. So that's my Instagram name. And I'm also on LinkedIn. If you're interested in my professional hats that I wear, so it's Tina Marie Woods LinkedIn. So if you just Google Tina Woods LinkedIn, you'll probably find me anyway. But yeah, we
did not get onto AI today much, but I do want to do that. So I'm going to read your book.
Okay.
Then maybe sooner rather than later, pull you back in for another episode.
Sure.
Good luck with everything. I love what you're doing, honestly. And let me know if you want me to connect you up with any of those people. A lot of drama. That's it.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, absolutely. I'd love to speak to all those people. It's funny that I don't know, because I know quite a few people in at Imperial, on the psychedelic research side.
Yeah.
Like David Nutt and his team, for example. Because David Nutt's the big guy.
So Joe Neal, Grace Blessed Hopley, and Keith are all tight with David.
Yeah. So and they probably know a lot of the researchers that I know as well.
Yeah. And Joe Neal runs the Drug Science podcast. Have you heard of that?
No, I haven't. I must.
That's with David Nutt. David Nutt and Joe Neal, Drug Science podcast on Spotify.
I might have listened to a couple of episodes. I just I listened to so many podcasts and stuff. But yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
But yeah, no, I'll look out for that. That's super interesting. But yeah. I saw David Nutt. Actually, not too far. By the way, he's trying to disrupt the whole drinks industry with this new brand that he's about to release. Non-alcoholic.
He's trying to disrupt the whole drinks industry
with this non-alcoholic substitute that hits the GABA receptor. And he wants the drinks industry to start using this as a not to necessarily replace all the alcohol, but to make them much less dependent on the actual alcohol ingredient in their recipes, because he knows that the alcohol industry is suffering with young kids, not all the non-alcohol stuff and the low alcohol stuff.
Which is why the zero alcohol prices have ramped up to the price of alcoholic drinks.
Exactly.
Mental.
Exactly. Yeah.
I need to get him on there. Joe Neal was going to line me up to get David on, but he's a difficult man to tie down.
Yeah.
Difficult man.
He's hard to tie down. But I know some other people who are working with him on that brand. I went to the launch of it.
I didn't know.
Because he's already got
What's it called?
Sentia. Well, he's already got Sentia, which is so they've just have a beer version. So the Sentia, there are three different
Are
types.
they on sale now?
Huh? They are on sale now. If you look up Sentia, yeah. Sentia.
CENTIA.
CENTIA, and they've just launched an interesting beer. But then they've got this sort of like version that they're going to sell on and white label. SENTIA. They're going to. It's almost like a white label version that they're going to be selling onto the drinks industry, so they can repackage and market it in any way that they want. But it's very, very interesting.
So this gets you in inverted commas drunk.
It doesn't. No, it makes you. So, because that was some of the questions. So basically, you lose your inhibitions, social anxiety, all that kind of stuff. But you can't get drunk on it because the way that from a scientific perspective, it reaches a plateau, and it's very, very difficult you can't really overconsume. You will never. The plateau will go on for hours and hours and hours, and you can never get that feeling that will. Once you reach the plateau, no matter how much more you drink, you will be on that plateau in terms of your feeling that you get. And there's a whole way that they've designed it that way. So it's interesting.
Could be pretty revolutionary.
It is, yeah. So you can't over abuse it, but it's a different sensation than the feeling of being wasted.
I'm going to pick up a pack this evening.
So you should try it.
Pale ales.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
And the ale actually is pretty good, I have to say. And there's one, I think the red version of Sentia was actually pretty good as well. There's red, black, and gold.
Yeah, I'm looking at those.
Yeah,
now.
the red one was pretty interesting.
They're not. Are they spirits?
They're
like spirits.
They're like spirits, yeah. And they've even got one that's kind of like a whiskey substitute, which is also interesting. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Been a pleasure, Tina. Thank you very much.
Thank you.